here again tonight as we get towards the end of the year, and it's raining pretty hard for the only time, but we managed to make it in time nevertheless. So we're in Daniel chapter 7, beginning from verse 1, and we're into a new section of Daniel, a section that deals very much with visions and dreams. And it's not in chronological order. It goes back to Belshazzar. As you know from chapter 6, we were dealing with Darius the Mede. And chapter 7 deals with Belshazzar, who is from Babylon, king of Babylon. So we're going back to that. So the reason it's out of order chronologically is because the first 6 chapters were dealing with different events that occurred, and God demonstrating His power through those events, even though you also had visions and so on in that particular section. But now we're really into very much the apocalyptic section of Daniel. So let's begin that, and by doing that, let's read the first 8 verses of Daniel. First 8 verses. Let's read it. Who would like to read that? Everybody got that? Who would like to read it nice and loud and clear? Luke? Yeah. Chapter 7, 1, verse 1 to verse 8. No, we're not going back to the beginning.
Okay. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of the human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. The beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had that large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns."
Okay. And verse 8.
While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one which came up among them, and 3 of first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully.
Okay, so it's a dream and a vision, so it's very pictorial. And you can see from the fact that he wrote it down that this is extremely pictorial. And he summarizes it. And in verse 2 he says, I was looking in my vision at night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And symbolically, the great sea refers to the mass of humanity. It refers to all of humanity. And that's used very much like that in Revelation as well. And the four winds, the number 4, when it comes to symbolism, is the number of man. 4 winds, 4 corners of the earth, and so on. So when you see the number 4, it generally represents the number of man. So there are quite a few different numbers that are symbolic. And so you can keep these in mind as we deal with them. Anybody would like to tell me what the number 3 represents? What you think the number 3 represents?
The Godhead.
Yeah, the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So you've got 4 being the man number, 4 corners of the earth, 4 winds. And specifically, it's always used like that. It always talks about the 4 winds or the 4 corners of the earth, even though we know the earth doesn't have corners, right? But that's just the way it's represented symbolically. It's not saying that the earth actually has 4 corners, but therefore it's the earth man number. And 3 is the God number. So when you put 4 and 3 together, you get 7. And that's the reconciliation number or the salvation number. Some people say that's the perfect number. But I think the perfect number is more 10. And 12 is a complete number. So you get multiples of these sometimes, which you see very much in Revelation. But here it's talking about the 4 winds of heaven. So that's interesting. The fact that it's talking about the 4 winds, and so it's already referring to earth. But then it also brings in heaven. So it says the 4 winds of heaven. So what do you think that idea is? What does heaven represent? What do you think heaven, if the 4 winds represents earth, what do you think heaven would represent? It would represent God, right? So, in other words, God is involved in this earthly endeavor where things have been stirred up. God's involved in it. He has a purpose for all of this. So the 4 winds of heaven are stirred up in the great sea. So humanity is, if you like, has been disrupted by this force, whatever it is, that also involves God. It's happening on earth, but it also involves God. So it has His purpose. So His purpose is behind what is going to occur. It's a disruptive force that's going to affect mankind, and it involves God. So that's the idea that he begins with regard to the winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. So if you keep that in mind, and even when you read Revelation, if you keep in mind that the sea generally represents the huge mass of humanity as a whole. And so what happens then is that 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. So once again, this has to do with humanity. So these 4 great beasts are basically human beasts, or at least have to do with humanity. And what is it? Well, it's the same as effectively, at least up to verse 8, but not including, well, verse 8 is an extension of it. But it's the same as the vision of Nebuchadnezzar that we went through in the first, in chapter 2. Remember us going through chapter 2 and the 4 different kingdoms? This is the same thing. In chapter 2, it represented it from the head and the torso and the hips and so on, and the legs and feet. 4 different powers, which can you remember which those 4 different powers were? Okay, so Babylon is the first one.
The head of gold.
Yes, it was the head of gold, and the chest of silver.
It was Medo-Persia.
Sorry.
It was Medo-Persia.
Yes, Medo-Persia, the kingdom of Medo-Persia, and we've become quite familiar with the Medes and the Persians, haven't we? In the fact that we have them actually. They kill Belshazzar, who is this king here, And he's the one that Daniel went to with regard to the writing on the wall. Remember that? And then he honors Daniel and for interpreting the dream for him. And then he's killed that very night. So it's going back to his time where Daniel has this particular vision and dream. So Daniel's getting this dream, and that's the Medes and the Persians. And then the third kingdom is the bronze, which refers to Alexander the Great, the Greek kingdom, which then supersedes the Medes and the Persians as the world power, as the great empire. And then the fourth kingdom is Rome. Okay, so this is the same. This is referring to the same thing, and it's elaborating on it a little bit. But it's the same four great powers, and then it's going to go into, in verse 8, a little bit more detail about the fourth one, the fourth kingdom, and what occurs during the fourth kingdom. And it's all very fascinating. So look at the description of each one. We see that the first one looked like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. And those who've been traveling with me on Sunday, when we go back home, we go past a house that's got those Babylonian lions at the entrance. Do you remember that? CD, do you remember? We can see them on the way home, right? Somebody's got it at the entrance of his place. He's put two Babylonian lions, winged lions, at his entrance. So it's quite curious as to why he's done that. But that refers to the kingdom of Babylon, and specifically the most famous ruler of Babylon, who is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar. He is the one who really makes Babylon a world power. And he's the most frightening of all the rulers. The one that come after him aren't really worth anything. But Belshazzar is not worth anything. And Belshazzar, although he's called a king, he was actually a regent. And Nabonidus, his father, was the actual king, but he was off wandering, in other parts of the world doing excavations for archaeology. So he was very much interested in one of your subjects. And so that was the king at that particular time. But there's Belshazzar is in place at this time. So you've got the first one, and he's got it was like a lion with the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. So, as I said, this is Babylon, and of course it's a very suitable symbol because it was ferocious like a lion, and the swiftness which it conquered the whole known world at the time was incredible. So it was a huge accomplishment to just overpower all these nations, including Egypt, which hadn't been conquered up to this particular time like that, never to come back again as a major power after this time. And so Babylon achieved that, and so that's how he's represented. And it's also describing Babylon as the beast, it's also describing Nebuchadnezzar, the actual king of Babylon. Do you remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar?
He ate humble pie.
He had to eat humble pie. What happened to him? Because he thought he was the greatest, right? Because it was a huge accomplishment, there's no doubt about it. So it's not surprising that he became consumed with his own vanity, that he was the greatest of all. And God humbled him, and what did God cause to happen to him? He basically became insane. And he spent, I think it was 3.5 years, I think the time is, eating, on his hands and knees, eating the grass, and he became essentially like a beast, a wild beast, until he came to his senses when he realized there was one true God, and that true God was greater than him, and that he was, after all, just a very fallible human being, and that his vanity had led him to madness. Okay? So that's Nebuchadnezzar, because when you talk about Babylon, you're talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Even in Isaiah chapter 14, when it talks about the fall of, when it predicts the fall of Nebuchadnezzar, before he even takes power, it describes his fall in Isaiah chapter 14. So that's very much worth reading in your own time, just to see it. People often take Isaiah chapter 14 and say that represents Satan, but it doesn't. If you read it very clearly, it's talking about the king of Babylon, and there's only one king of Babylon, really, that has that greatness, and that's Nebuchadnezzar. So, when it's describing here exactly what happened to him, and it's saying he was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, because he was on all fours for that period of time when he was insane, because he hadn't acknowledged the one true God, and so his own vanity had driven him insane, but now he gets taken back onto his 2 feet. He's come back onto his 2 feet, like a man, and a human mind was also given to it, because during the time of the madness, he had the disposition of a beast. Okay. Yes.
But even the description here,
yes,
before, that his wings were clipped.
His wings were clipped. His power was taken away from him.
Yeah, because here it says his wings were pulled off.
Yes, plucked.
Plucked. I mean,
yes, like a chicken.
Yeah, the common.
And most of us know what that looks like. Okay, well, some of you have probably plucked a chicken.
So I think the common expression in our day is that
yes,
his wings were clipped.
His wings were clipped.
His feet, he was humbled.
He could no longer fly.
He could no longer fly.
Yeah. So how was this the Superman? Okay, and now he can no longer fly. His power was taken away from him, and he ended up with his power removed, his wings clipped, being on his fours like a beast, with a disposition of a beast. And it took it until the time where he acknowledged the Most High God, until that actually changed, and he came back to his senses, and that makes a big difference. And that we see in Daniel chapter 4, right? Verse 33 of chapter 4. Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. But at the end of the period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honor him who lives forever. That's truly a remarkable thing, because here you have this incredibly powerful pagan king who turns to Yahweh, to the God of Israel, to the one true God. Okay? After all, the fact that he had taken over the whole world in a very short period of time, like a winged lion, and of course then his power is returned to them. So this is the first one. This is the first beast, and Nebuchadnezzar represents it. So his sanity is restored. A human mind is given to it. He comes back to sanity. God gives him his sanity back when he turns back to God. So that's the idea with regard to this lion with the wings of an eagle. And as I say, even with representative of Babylon, that's still true. You know, if you look it up, if you Google it, you'll see those winged lions as representing Babylon. So Daniel, of course, lived in Babylon, so he was very familiar with that, and very familiar with what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. So that's the first beast. That's the head of gold of chapter 2. And then behold another beast, the second one, resembling a bear. Right? And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth, and between its teeth. And thus they said to it, arise and devour much meat. Okay? So, the second one resembles a bear, and the reason it resembles resembles a bear is because the bear is the biggest bears around were in Medo-Persia. Okay? They're the biggest and most fiercest bears, and the bears were symbolic of Persia. It was, you know, the wildest, most dangerous bears were found in Persia. So just as the lion is representative of Babylon, so also the actual bear itself is represented by is representative of Medo-Persia. Yeah, all right. So and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said to it, arouse and devour much meat. Okay, so that's quite interesting as to what that, you know, it talks about 3 ribs in its mouth, and it's actually quite interested about what that actually means, and there's different ways it's interpreted. One of the interpretations of it is that it represents the fact that, in actual fact, you had Persia and Media combined together as two powers, and also the kingdom of mine hasn't got it in here, so I'm trying to remember it. I think it's Sardis, the kingdom of Sardis. So those 3 kingdoms basically combined, and so these 3 ribs are representative of those 3 kingdoms. That's one viewpoint with regard to the 3 ribs that were in its mouth, and some say that it's just representative of 3 kings. So it's that particular, it's, you know, one of those 2 ideas. Yeah.
And another view is that it's representative of the kingdom that they conquered.
Yes.
Kingdoms that they conquered.
Yes.
Firstly, Babylon. Secondly, you have even Egypt as one of those kingdoms.
It conquered that. They conquered that. They conquered the first one to be conquered was actually Media.
Media, yes.
But so that was Cyrus the Great. He's the one who let the people go. Okay, he conquered first of all Persia, and then he conquered, as I say, before that he actually conquered Lydia, Sardis, that region, which was also a very great, powerful nation. And that king actually asked an oracle what would happen if he went against Cyrus, and the oracle told him, "You will destroy a great kingdom." So he took that to mean that the kingdom to be destroyed would be the great kingdom of Cyrus, but it was his kingdom that actually got destroyed. Babylon was actually the last power that was available that was destroyed. Of course, Egypt was another one. You know, so there could be the 3 major kingdoms three major kingdoms of that time that were conquered by either Persia or Medo-Persia. So it could perhaps refer, if you talked about the 3 biggest ones, Media was the biggest one, and Babylon, another really big one, and as you indicated, Egypt being the 3rd one. All right?
Yeah, because I'm actually inclined to that interpretation.
Yes.
Because you see, they were in its teeth.
So he's eaten them.
He's eating them.
Yes.
I think that for me, I'm more inclined.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you make. So I'd be inclined to go along with that one. All right. So thus they said to it, "Arise, devour much meat." And Medo-Persia actually, as a landmass, up to that point of time, as far as conquests are concerned, was the biggest of the kingdoms. It was bigger than Babylon. Right? So, as far as the landmass is concerned, so devour much meat. The idea being, and that would also be in line with the symbolism of the verse, means conquer much territory. All right? So conquer many nations. And so that's that's the second one. That's the second power. And we're looking at, essentially Babylon was in power from, probably the major power from about 620 BC until 586, a very short period of time. And then the Medes and the Persians came in, of course, at 536. Did I say 586? 536. Okay. So from about 620 to 536, that's the Babylonians. Right? And then for about 200 years, the Persians are actually in power. So then comes the next one, which is, of course, which kingdom?
Greece.
Greece, yeah. All right.
Yeah, but before we move to the third one, the second one, it says it was raised on one side.
Yeah.
You know, and that I think maybe there's also significance there.
Okay.
It can either be that one, it was more powerful than the Medians, you know?
Yeah.
Or it can be it was raised maybe by God. It's God who was involved.
Raised up on one side rather than as holy. So, in other words, one power being greater than the other, because it's known as the Medes and the Persians, but it's the Persians who are actually the greater power of the two. The Medes are, of course, a much lesser power as far as that is concerned. Although at the beginning they were the more powerful nation. In actual fact, Cyrus actually attacked his grandfather. Essentially, his grandfather was ruling in Media, and his grandfather basically married his daughter off to Cambyses, who was a king over a fairly minor city in Persia, because there was this again oracles involved, and the oracle has said that he had a dream about his daughter, and out of the womb came water that flooded the whole country of Media. So the interpretation that was given to him by the oracle was that something that she did was going to be calamitous to the whole country. So he didn't kill her, but he married her off to Cambyses, who was this minor Persian king, and thought, well, that'll settle everything. And even after Cyrus's birth, then he tried to have him killed, but he ended up not being killed. There's a whole long story which I'm not going to go into with regard to that. But eventually Cyrus manages to unite all the tribes of Persia, and Persia becomes the most powerful kingdom, and he goes and defeats his grandfather. But they're quite merciless. It doesn't matter. His family doesn't matter. So, but the one interesting thing about that is that he is both a Mede and he's also a Persian. So he's got a foot in both camps. He's a Mede and a Persian. Cyrus is a Mede and a Persian. All right. So, then we get to the third kingdom, and he says another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So when you look at it, first of all, again, what does a leopard represent? Speed. Okay. So it's incredible how quickly this young man, who I think he was about 20 or 19 or 20 when he started off on his conquest, and he was dead by 32. And in that short period of time, he conquered the whole world. So the speed with which he did it, again, was absolutely incredible. And to defeat the Medes and the Persians, who are a much bigger army, they had hundreds of thousands of men. He had tens of thousands. I'm trying to think, it was 35,000 altogether he had. I can't remember the exact number. But it was absolutely incredible that he managed to defeat huge armies much bigger than his own. So it talks about the fact, again, the leopard with 4 wings of a bird. Again, 4 wings represents the mankind, represents Earth. It's an Earth number. But it's just, again, it represents the fact that this particular beast, the Greek Empire, conquered with great speed. Conquered the world with great speed. So it talks about the fact that it also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now the reason it had 4 heads was that immediately after Alexander's death, the whole empire that he had created was in chaos, and essentially out of the chaos, what you had was that the whole empire was divided into 4 kingdoms. So 4 heads. Heads is another term that when you talk about heads, heads also represents power, okay, authority. It does throughout the whole Bible, you know. That talks about that, 1 Corinthians 11, for example. The head of God is Christ, and the head of woman is man. That's talking about authority, power. So head represents power. So the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So again, you have from about 350 to when Rome started to come in and exert huge power. Basically, you're looking at around about, I think in that area they really started to conquer around about 70 BC. Rome really dominating from that period of time, first of all with Pompey, and then with one that we know very well from, if you know anything about your Shakespeare, and that's Julius Caesar. Yeah, okay. All right. So that's the Greek kingdom. And this is quite remarkable because I've thrown out some numbers there with regard to periods. And it starts 600 years. So you've got a space of approximately 600 years where 4 major kingdoms come one after another in that 600-year period. 4 major kingdoms occur. So that kind of prediction is incredible when you think about it. Just contemplate how broad that is. This is not just talking about one single event or describing a piece of that event, but 4 great kingdoms that succeed one another, all 4 of them, in the space of about 600 years. Only God can predict something like that. So what you've got here in Daniel is a prediction of 4 successive kingdoms that God reveals in the time of Babylon, where the first one is existing. And then a spread of 600 years, 4 major kingdoms. And the 4th one is Rome, the kingdom of Rome. And that's what you get there finally. And how does it describe it? The 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying. Dreadful and terrifying. And extremely strong. As I said right when we did it originally, the Romans were absolutely ruthless in their conquest of the world. And what they achieved was what was called in the 1st century the Pax Romana, which is the
Roman peace.
The Roman peace. Okay? In other words, they not only conquered this whole world, but they subdued it. It's not just a matter of, every nation had a different way of dealing with things. For example, if you take the Medes and the Persians, they were very tolerant. And the Babylonians very much appreciated the fact that Cyrus, after defeating them in Babylon, joined with them in celebrations to their god Marduk. Cyrus actually came in and honored their god Marduk. Cyrus was an equal opportunity appeaser when it came to gods, because he also appeased the God of Yahweh and allowed his people to go back to their land. All right? So That was the way that they handled people. And what Cyrus did was he brought in all of these people. He had essentially vassal kings, in other words, subject kings over his different territories. And so, but basically, it was a way of just putting everybody in and making everybody happy. With the Greeks, they also were very much easy with regard to the practices of the people, although they very much spread a lot of Greek culture and in particular their language. But their language and their philosophy really caught fire in that whole region. But very much more tolerant. The Romans are a different story. The Romans just crushed everything before them. If you got in their way, they were going to just take you to pieces and crush you and grind you to dust. And that's exactly how it's described here. And so they would defeat you. They would kill a lot of the men, send a lot of them to the Colosseum, or the Colosseum comes later, but and sell huge numbers into slavery. That was the way they dealt with people. And so even Rome, for example, Rome had about 50% of the population of Rome were slaves. And at one time they contemplated actually taking a census of all the slaves in Rome. The decision was made against it. Why? Because they didn't want the slaves to know how many of them there were. Because they might rise up if they knew just how many of them there were in Rome. So that census never happened. But the Romans were extremely powerful and brutal, and they would bring everything and crush everything. So what you have then is it has these large iron teeth to crush and devour and trample, and it was different from all the other beasts that were before it in its organization, in its ruthlessness, and in its ability to subdue nations. It stood alone, apart from all the other three kingdoms. And so you have it there. And it talks about it there, and it says, it was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay? Now what does a horn represent? Power. Okay? A horn represents power. Essentially, there are 10 kings of Rome that, in particular, from Caesar onwards, that had a major impact on the first century. Right? The preparation for the first century and the first century itself, starting with Julius Caesar. And so there's a whole lot of them. And the first one, which has essentially seven kings, starts with Caesar and ends with Nero. Now we all know about Nero. That Nero was the Roman emperor that Paul had to go before, and he was crazy. Right? He was so bad eventually that his whole Praetorian Guard deserted him, and he ended up hiding in a house with just a few servants. And he got the point, and so he basically committed suicide at that point, because he was completely out of control as a Caesar. And of course, he's the one who also blamed the Christians for the fire in Rome, and basically had skins put over Christians, and then released wild dogs to tear them to pieces. And he also put them on crosses on the road to Rome, and set the crosses on fire at night as well. So that's Nero, not a very nice guy. But essentially from Caesar to Nero, it's called the Caesar Claudius dynasty. Okay? Those two families basically have these 7 kings. And then the 8th king is actually Vespasian. Right? The 8th emperor is Vespasian. And Vespasian is the king who, along with the son Titus, is the one who subdues Judea, because the Judeans had revolted against the Romans and put up a very strong fight against the Romans. And essentially Vespasian is called upon by Nero to go and deal with that. And so he goes with his son, who's also a general at the time, Titus. He actually had two sons, but Titus was the main one. I think Domitian's the other one. But anyway, they go into Judea and they begin basically going to all these fortresses that the Jews had developed in order to fight the Romans, and slowly start to conquer them. It takes them about 3.5 years to do that. And during that time is when Nero himself dies. In fact, Vespasian almost gets into a lot of trouble with Nero before that, because he became too popular with Nero, so Nero took him off to Greece, Cyrene. And what Nero would do is he would have these singing concerts which starred Nero. Okay. And they started early in the morning and they would go late at night. And everybody had to sit there while Nero entertained them from early morning to late at night, and you couldn't leave. Okay? You had to be there for Nero to listen to him singing. So can you imagine listening to the same person singing? It probably wasn't very good. You know? And probably wasn't very good at playing instruments either. The whole day and into the night. Some of them, the Greeks of the region, they figured out a way to get out of it. They would pretend to swoon in ecstasy, you know, to faint in ecstasy because of the singing and had to be carried out. But Vespasian on one occasion, and Nero looked up and he saw he had nodded off, and that was it. He was gone, you know, and his life was basically Nero could have killed him at any moment. But what happened was Nero killed the other famous general, because he was a famous general as well. Nero killed the other famous general a couple of weeks before he got the message of the revolt in Judea. So the only general available who could take on that particular task just happened to be Vespasian. So that saved Vespasian from that. So he goes off to Judea and he starts the conquest. And when Nero dies, there's three kings in succession in the same year who all end up dying, or end up being killed. When I say dying, it's not like they just died. They were all killed. Right? So you've basically got a civil war going on in Rome. And Vespasian's there in Judea with Titus, ready to put Jerusalem under siege, and he basically lets Titus put Jerusalem under siege, and he heads away. He actually goes to Egypt, which is pretty smart because that was the breadbasket of the world. So he goes to Egypt and then controls the food. He's after the crown, and he gets it. And Vespasian is actually is one who's mentioned here when it talks about a little horn, but that's not for tonight. But I've given you a brief introduction to Vespasian and why, and some of the information of why, which I haven't mentioned exactly why is a little horn, but that can be something for next week. And the fact that it talks about he's a little one, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out before it. He's the one who overcomes 3 other emperors to take power. Okay? So he's very influential in God's purpose in many ways, both with the conquest of Judea and the taking over of Rome. And so he's been described here. And I've just given you a little bit of insight into this verse, but there's quite a bit more. But that's for next week. Right? So, are there anything that we need to specifically have in prayer? Okay. Right. Rabin.